What's up, guys? Welcome to a special episode of the Comfort Zone Commander podcast, your place for some casual, comfortable Commander conversations. I'm your host, Dan. That's your host, John. John, why is today special?
Today is special because we are going to be giving you guys our full, completely biased set review for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. We're going to go over commanders we like. We're going to go over cards we like for the 99. We're going to go over the art, the flavor, the story. We're going to give all that to you guys. But if you're an audio-only listener, please feel free to jump on over to the YouTube. There are definitely a couple of sections in here that you might be a little better off being able to see some of those images for yourself. But for everybody listening, we're going to have chapters linked down in the description so you can find exactly which content is most interesting or valuable to you. And last but not least,
in celebration of the release of Lost Caverns of Ixalan, we are still running our sealed set booster box giveaway of the Wilds of Eldraine. But in all seriousness, not because of Ixalan or anything, we are still running our giveaway here, and it is super easy to enter. All you have to do is be one of the first 100 subscribers to the YouTube channel and leave a comment down below in any of the videos during the duration of the contest, and you're in. See the rest of the official nitty-gritty rules down in the description. And if you haven't heard, we recently launched our Patreon and Discord. So if you guys love the channel and you want to support what we're doing here and show a little bit of extra love, go ahead and check those things out. We got a lot of cool things for you, community building, so on and so forth. It'll be a great time to have you over there. But without further ado, get comfortable because we're going to dive in to the Caverns of Ixalan. All right, guys, we're going to get started here with our story for the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and we're going to do it in a bit of a quick and dirty take style, cliff notes, if you will, just me and John's overview of what happened in the story. If you guys are looking for more of a detailed version of the story, we'll link some stuff down in the description below for you guys to go check out some resources where you can listen to the whole thing or just read all of the side stories and everything from MTG Official. So check it out down there if you want to see the background to everything we cover here. But without further ado, we're going to get started with our story, how it opens up in the actual release story with Quintorius Kand, who arrives on Ixalan. Basically, he just stumbles into a forest and he's immediately confronted by these dinosaurs and trying to figure out how to deal with that. Eventually, he's going to run into a character in that scenario called Wada. She's been pronounced a couple different ways I've seen so far. But effectively, she is, think of her as like a lesser for Huatli, who aspires to be the next warrior poet, at least at the beginning of our story here. So Wade is going to bring Quint over to Araska, where he's going to meet Huatli and Saheeli in this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe it's like almost like an ancient library kind of setting where they're, Huatli's kind of going over some tablature, which has language that she can't really fully get a hold of. And Quinn's going to arrive here because of his investigations into something that's being called the Coin Empire, which is basically some ancient civilization, which apparently, since poofing off of Strixhaven after the collapse of the multiverse almost, he's just been investigating some random historical lineage. So ironically, our stories kind of line up here because Quint believes that this Coin Empire has something to do with some ancient civilization here on Ixalan, and Huatli happens to be investigating these tablets that Quint thinks are going to be in some way related. So the two kind of join up and try to figure out this tablet puzzle, if you will, which opens up some kind of door down into the Caverns of Ixalan, if you will. So they're going to venture down in. They bring some forces with them just because, cave adventures, who knows, spooky, scary stuff could happen. And for a bit there, it's kind of like a stereotypical Indiana Jones vibe, if you will. We got like some things that feel kind of booby trap-esque. There's some kind of like valley of mist that seems endlessly going down and some like floating rock bridge that they have to get across. And, you have Wada, who's kind of like this ambitious, like, I'm just going to jump for it, and then she almost kills herself, almost yeets into the mists, but, gets saved and the whole nine. It feels very like tropically, a cave adventure, if you will. And then they're going down further into the caves. Eventually they come into like these giant cavernous rooms that kind of feel like, full worlds below the surface, if you will. And in one of these situations, it's almost like a little city or a town where Quint thinks he notices some kind of sparkly purple light off in the distance, and they kind of venture towards it. And eventually they run into a poncho, which you may think is not relevant. But because we got our boy Quint here, he's able to imbue the spirit of the person who embodied this poncho back to animation, if you will. And it's our character Abuelo, which is basically just Spanish for grandpa, which he kind of connects with because he remembers somebody in his past life maybe having called him that, but we don't know any other name for him, so that's what he gets called. And basically, he starts immediately running off down the streets because he's supposed to warn people of some looming threat, which we're going to hear about in a second from John, more about what that threat is. But anyway, they chase after him and so on and so forth. But basically, they want to get him and his help and his information about this secret city, this big door to like the land of the gods, some lost world, if you will, again, that Whatley was kind of investigating with those tablets, and they think the spirit can help them. Eventually, a little bit down the line here, they run into some kind of new looming threat. It's some kind of titan, and it's necrotic and huge, and they're fighting it, but it doesn't seem to be sustaining very much damage from their blows. And then eventually it's bringing on more little underling titans, and they're getting overwhelmed, and it's not looking good for our heroes. So when all looks bleak, of course, we got that Hail Mary saving grace, and we get the Merfolkian people coming to play here. The Rivers Herald, right? That's their name? Mm-hmm. River Heralds. So they arrive right in the nick of time to kind of scoop up all of our people, throw them into the water, and skirt them over to the River Herald land right out of danger before they were to lose that battle. So at this point, we're going to kind of have that merging of stories. The overall story is told more in like a triptych fashion with a few different factions who are going to meet up. So because we're at our meetup point here, I'm going to pass it over to John. He's going to tell you about our other two factions that are at play. John, who else do we got in this crazy mess?
All right, so we got Malcolm, who is the kind of representative in this story of the pirate faction. He's a pirate siren. And him, along with Breeches, the goblin pirate, who's got a little bit of a monkey-esque vibe going on. The two of them are investigating one of the mining towns. More specifically, something I thought was hilarious is in the story, they're basically like, Malcolm's investigating this for two reasons. One, because he was told to, and B, because he has like stocks or money invested in the mining, and he's losing money because they're not mining as much stuff. But either way, him, Breeches, and a couple other pirates go and start investigating these mine shafts. There's a bunch of mine shafts. They all look empty. There's no people in the town. There's like unfinished meals and the food's gone rotting. So they're like, let's just start diving into the mines. And I think they go, it's like 9, 10, maybe even more before they find anything. It's empty mine shaft after empty mine shaft. But eventually, they get into a mine shaft where there is a fungal dinosaur. They see this dinosaur-looking creature, but it's covered in like mushroom fungus grossness. And of course, immediately the siren, Malcolm, is like, okay, guys, cover your mouths, or I'm going to put my scarf above my face, or your bandanas, or what have you. And there's a little bit of a scuffle, and some of the guys get a little bit tainted, like there's this like black stuff appearing on them. But they don't pay no mind to that, they don't really care. And they do some more traveling. Eventually, the pirates went further down, they've lost a couple of the guys, and I'm pretty sure they get right down to like maybe 1 or 2 guys, but pretty sure it's just Malcolm and Breeches. And they run into the inception here of the weird fungus, the weird titan, the weird dinosaur covered in spores, who we find out is the Myco-Tyrant, the like, so to speak, lord of mushrooms and fungal stuff here in the Ixalan underground. And he has a very strange request. He wants the sun, which is a very strange thing for him to ask. And of course, Malcolm and Breeches are like, I don't know about that. And they kind of zip on out of there. And that is kind of where they then intercept into the rest of the main group. Another one of the factions that is simultaneously doing all of these adventurous goings-ons is the vampires. The vampires kind of have what to me felt like a pretty big group of named characters. There's Vito the Dusk Rose, a member of the Dusk Rose or whatever, with Alenda and all those guys. There's Amalia, who is, of course, a new fan favorite character. She's the one who works with maps and understands the numbers and all that. And then there's Bartolome. I've been calling him Bart because it's shorter and doesn't have the accents that I don't want to misspell. But they're all going with a group of vampires into the Ixalanian underground. Amalia is kind of helping lead with Vito because she's a cartographer and she has magic that works the maps. So they're going on this adventure looking for a temple. They want to release or find or learn more about alllll, who is the bat god. So they're going through the caves and they're looking to try to find the temple. Eventually they get to a door. And they're like, oh, a door. I wonder how we're going to do that. And Vito basically snaps his fingers and has somebody who was like carrying his luggage for the last couple of miles and just slits his throat right there to open the door. Just no questions asked. That guy got sacrificed. We're all fine and dandy there. So they go into the temple and there's an obsidian altar and a gold door. Again, Bartolome this whole time is kind of like, I don't know, Vito, like, this isn't the right thing. Vito doesn't really care about what he has to say. Again, they go through another door, there's another sacrifice. Again, everybody's getting continually wary, and they end up in what's basically a giant desert, but like in a cave underground. Somebody steps onto the sand and they get swallowed up whole, but not like quicksand. They specifically say way faster than quicksand, which I thought was an interesting anecdote. So they use like a sense of people finding safe spots in the sand that aren't quicksand, moving planks. Another very like, how do we get across the sand thing without dying that we see in a lot of like sand adventure desert type things. Once they cross all of that, they reach this area where there's like a giant wall of fire, and they see somebody who they don't recognize running from some goblins. We recognize him as Kellen. If you guys remember the Wilds of Eldraine story, Kellen's like our new fun main character guy. Vito, of course, is like, we don't care about that guy. He's irrelevant. Amalia, of course, is like, hey, no, like, we should probably do something about it. Vito's like, don't do it. She's like, I'm going to do it anyway. Then she uses her super interesting powers where she kind of deletes an area where they're running on, Kellen and these goblins. So the goblins fall and die, and Kellen almost falls and dies, but doesn't. And at that point, he kind of introduces himself to the group. Vito's like, everything that is not the Bat God is irrelevant. And Amalia's like, fine, I'll take responsibility for him, whatever. They continue on and eventually are discovered by some cat warrior people. They are then taken to the city of, I think it was pronounced Bankosh, I think, where they meet the Okinek, the cat lord king guy. There it is. So he basically is like, what are you guys doing here? And Vito's like, we're just on like a journey. And he's like, wrong. Throw them into the sand. And there's this fountain that apparently instead of water, it is sand. And they just throw our characters into the sand. And Amalia quickly warns Kellen to hold his breath. And that is where we leave them off in this venture of the story. Where do we come in with the rest of the meeting of the people?
Yeah, for sure. So this is kind of our merger section, if you will. We've seen these kind of like stylistic storytelling strategies many times now, where it's like telling multiple stories that eventually merge into the one story. So for us here, the sands that they're sinking into actually kind of ploop you out into some river, which happens to be where the river heralds are. Yes, of course. And hopefully that washes the sand out of all of their extraneous orifices and whatnot. Because in the story, it does describe how the sand is leaking into their ears and their eyes and things like that from the pressure and everything, which sounds horrendous. But I'm just imagining that the bath was quite nice after that. But alas, the river heralds kind of get them in conjunction with Huatley's group. Now, Malcolm and Breaches are not here at this point quite yet. But basically, so the River Heralds are interrogating them and being like, what's going on here? Are you working together kind of thing? Like, why would you work with vampires and do this and that? And then, Huatley's like, well, like peace and this whole 9 yards with the vampires. And, we just fought this big multiversal threat together. So, it be what it be kind of thing. Like, they're all right. Mm-hmm. And we all have this mutual objective, right? Because the River Heralds are waiting for, the opening of this grand door, and Huatley and their team are trying to investigate the same. And of course, Vito and his team want to get into the grand door to find alllll or whatever his name is. And so all together, Huatley's basically like, yo, how about we work together, because we got this Abuelo, and he has these special cosmium beads, which are apparently the key to opening this door, right? And this is the first time we actually hear about cosmium in the story, which, still not really clear on what it is, going to be honest with you, but we'll get to that. But so he's got these beads that are cosmium-esque, and Abuelo's like, yo, okay, let's open this door. And the River Heralds are like, that sounds like a good plan. So that's what they do. They go and they open the door and they put the beads in, they walk in, and poof, it's this total kind of inverted world thing, where if you imagine like what it would be like to be at the core of a planet that has miles and miles of like inner sky, but the sky ends with more ground that is just like above you. You remember the movie Inception with Leo and whatever, right? Like in that one scene where they're like, morphing the dream and the city's like just kind of rising up. Like that's what I picture. When I imagine like the inner Ixalan world is just like the earth kind of doing that and then enclosing around you. And then we have, at the center of it is this kind of like purple hued sun almost, with these like random like metal shards kind of like floating around it. And the sun's name is Chamil or whatever. And immediately upon opening this door, we are greeted by the Oltec people, which are, ironically, the still very much alive ancient people that everybody was kind of trying to discover. And they come on these like big bats. I believe the Inami Pakal or Inam Pakal, whatever, the 1000th moon is one of the first characters to actually greet them. I don't think we really get like very much an explanation as to what the whole moon thing is, or the gnomes, at least in the story, through the sources that I consumed it. Not positive. Check it out down below, or let me know if you're familiar where all those people play in particularly. But they're greeted by them, and then they recognize the vampire group as being kind of like a no clan. So like, again, they're like, what the heck are you doing with these people? We don't support like, the faithful to the betrayer or whatever, which is referring to alllll. And then basically they're like, okay, they got to go. And even though Huatley was, kind of preaching this like, oh, we'll group up and maybe we could be a team now after the whole, Phyrexian thing. They don't put much of a stink up about it. They're like, yeah, go ahead, take him. They're not very, we don't really, we weren't really with them, you know what I mean? We just kind of like, we showed up, they were here, we don't know. So they let them get imprisoned, and that's cool. And then they go have like kind of like a El Dorado-esque kind of moment. Do you guys remember that old movie? There's this like scene in El Dorado where they're at the Golden City and they're just kind of like going around in the town, doing all of like the local things. So it has like that kind of vibe to it, if you will, where they're kind of like going and like kind of learning the people's ways or whatever in this very quick montage style esque, if you will, Huatley and that group. And meanwhile, we got the vampires who are up in their prison cell. And of course, like, Vito's all like, man, this ain't cool with me. I need that alllll, because everything about that bat god. And so he's just looking for some more sacrifices. So he's in his prison cell, and we have the like good guy vampire group, Amalia and Kellen, in a separate cell, because that's convenient for what's going on here. So they hear Vito in his cell being all fanatical, and then he's like, yeah, we got to get out of here. So I guess he's like killing people or something over there, just sacking people, which I somehow nobody like saw coming. So he's just like sacking everybody he can over there in that cell, full aristocratically style, except he ain't bringing them back. And then he somehow uses that to peace out. So he's out of there. He escapes, cool. And there's some kind of misty jank. And then all of a sudden, like all these old tech people who are supporters of the betrayer arrive, and they're like, hey, we're going to help you get to the betrayer. And he's like, wow, I didn't realize he was imprisoned, nor did I realize non-vampire people cared. But all right. So they bring him over to Aclazotz, who's in some kind of, prison, and he's got these chains attached to him, these golden chains that are infused with cosmium or whatever, and he finds him, and he gets in the room, and he's like, Aclazotz, my guy, what you need, bro? And of course Aclazotz is like, bring me all the sacrifices, because like that's the theme here for some reason. So the whole rest of the story is kind of just Vito being like, bring the sacrifices, more blood, like over and over again. So as he's sacrificing more people to Aclazotz or whatever, somehow like the cosmium chains are weakening or whatever, because Aclazotz is getting like stronger. I don't really know exactly how that science works, but Aclazotz eventually is like, hey, see these chains? Pshing! No, not anymore. And he gets out because of all the sacrifices have been juicing him up. He's been roiding up. So immediately he's like, come over here, Vito. And Vito's like, oh, yay, thank the Lord. And then Aclazotz digs his claws into Vito and like turns him into some vampire demon, style deal with wings and claws instead of hands and everything. So he's a big bad now. And he does the same kind of thing with some of his followers. And then they come out of the temple and they're ready to just, storm the inner Ixalan land. So Aclazotz immediately goes for Chmiel, the inner sun, and he's ready to shut that puppy down, bring on the night. So he's using his power, and he's trying to crush the like metal bits around Chmiel, the shards that were floating around, just to kind of close up on the sun. And he's pretty much doing it, and the sun's going away, and it's all dark and stuff. But then Aclazotz forgets that he was in prison for like 1,000 years, so he runs out of power and passes out. And then, of course, Vito's like, no, Aclazotz, bring more sacrifices for Aclazotz. And that's kind of the vibe for a minute. Now we got Huatli in that group with, oh, by the way, a character that I didn't introduce to y'all, but his name is Inti. Why did I not introduce you to him? Because, I don't know, he just kind of like be showing up here. Inti apparently is Huatli's cousin, who matters. Take my word for it. And then Inti is like, and Huatli and that group are going to go into battle. And the reason I mention it is because it's going to be one of our like heart-wrenching moments, if you will, in the story in a moment. Spoilers. But so they're going into battle with that thing. And then at the same time, now we get the whole introduction of Malcolm into the mix, because Malcolm, during this moment in time with the Aclazotz business, he's escaping the Myco tyrant and passes through the land of the River Heralds. Again, he can fly, so he's flip-flapping around with breaches down in the River Heralds, and all these fungal forces are falling after him because the Myco tyrant's kind of, PO'd that he didn't get the sun from Malcolm for some reason. Why did he think Malcolm could bring him the sun? I just want to know. Okay, like I know I'm interrupting this. We're supposed to do our opinion after, but like what? Like this, a Myco tyrant who has these mycelium connections with like all these different things. He's like, yes, Malcolm. I know Malcolm. He'll be able to get me the sun. Crazy. Okay, sorry. Well, anyway, so Myco tyrant's, he's peeved, bro. He's like, well, you didn't give me the sun, so now he's up and at him, and they're all chasing him. And the River Heralds are like, yo, Malcolm, why did you bring this threat down to us? And he's like, I don't know, man. And they're like, we have to warn our people on the other side. And he's like, I'll do it because I don't want to stop here. So he keeps flying through. He goes through the door. And now we have our big like joining of armies, if you will. So Malcolm zips through the door into Inner Ixalan, and all the Myco tyrant forces are coming through the door. Like they're coming in, they're all fungal. And then we have Aclazotz bat people fighting. We got Huatli and their forces and the people of Inner Ixalan all joining together to fight all these different mixed problems, and it's crazy. But basically how this is all going to resolve is in two couple interesting ways, where Vito, Aclazotz, we don't know, but Vito, he's now like our kind of bad guy since Aclazotz passed out. So Vito's going to go up against Inti in this moment where Inti, I believe it's Vito v Inti, but either way, Inti's going to be riding a bat up to the bad people, I believe Vito, and Vito's going to kill the bat. He's going to stab it in the head, zoop, right in the brain, and Inti's going to fall. Then Whatley's going to find Inti. Inti died. He's dead, bro. I know you guys are really choked up about this because I just introduced you to this character, but he's dead. That man's gone. So don't get attached. But so Inti's dead, bro. I just want to make sure you understand. This is a big deal. Okay. But Whatley is like, no, my cousin, so now she mad. And Vito's like, oh, I need you for a sacrifice. Come here, So anyway, they deuce it out. And then Whatley's like really trying, and but she's reaching out with her energy to like summon dinosaurs, and it's very hard because she can't focus on the two things at once, but it succeeds. And all these dinosaurs come up and they just gang up on Vito, and they're like punching him, tail whipping him, chomping him, and he's like, holy crap, there's a lot of dinos. And then Whatley gets the spear that Vito had that I didn't introduce you until now, which isn't entirely relevant, but it's a spear. So she goes shoink and goes ahead and shish kebabs that boy, and then he dies just whispering Eglazards, which is very fitting of his like random weird obsession tale here. So he's dead. Okay, he's gone. Now what about the fungus people, you ask? Oh, well, this one's very interesting. Buckle in. So Quintorius finds out that Abuelo's wife was a good gardener or something, and that the people in relation to them were like good at gardening, I guess. They did like some good fruits and veggie stuff. So of course, they possess the magical power to become a fungicide, which I know is obvious, so you probably didn't need me to tell you this part. But they become some kind of ephemeral fungicide, and in spirit form enter the bodies of the fungal infected people, and they just dissolve, like they just bloop away. And yeah, because that you knew that was how it was going to go. So that kind of takes out most of the fungal masses of the army, but the micro tyrant, he's special. He's chonky. So what's going to happen with him? Well, as his like people are getting depleted and everybody's dying, whatever. We got Breaches and Malcolm coming in, and they're like, okay, it's our time to be heroes. And Breaches is like, oh, is it boom time? And Malcolm's like, oh, it's boom time. So they get out some kind of like pirate cannon, very, very piratey of them, and they just shoot some big bomb at them, boom pile style, and got bloomy. They think that takes care of the Micro Tyrant, so he dead, right? It's like, or at least, so we think, wink, wink. So it's all Gucci. Everything's solid. Except, where's Acklazant? Nobody knows. He's gone. He got out. And nobody has any idea. He's just gone. But it's not too much of a panic at the moment, because they're like, well, you know what we should do? We should have a feast. Because we killed a good majority of the bad guys. Maybe not like the ultimate betrayer god, and he's gone. But we should have a feast and talk about relations. So they have a feast and they talk about relations between inner Ixalan and outer Ixalan. And it seems like everything's going to be hunky-dory. And then they bring up at some point, they're like, we got to find Acklazant. We should probably find that guy. So they kind of agree on that, and a union of peoples, which is nice. Then Whatley's going to ditch because she hears that there's possibly some kind of like civil war happening somewhere else on the plane. So she's going to go help with that stuff. Malcolm's going to go back to try to, wherever his little like home is, some kind of like pirate name place, Sea Cove, Bridge Lake, pirate ship or whatever. But he gets there. And everybody is gone or fungused, and all the land is covered in fungus. He's like, oh my God, no, the Micro Tyrant, he ain't dead. So he's going up to this, the real pirate haven. It wasn't his exact home, but it's where you want to be. So it's High and Dry is the name. Very interesting. So he's racing up there to try to save them before the fungus meets them. We're told that the Micro Tyrant has found a way to be a little bit more incognito at this point. So instead of just looking like, I don't know, big dead pieces of flesh with giant mushrooms on them, somehow he now has the power to look like completely normal person. Not dead,
very
nor fungal.
Convenient camouflage tactic.
Apparently the eyeballs, he couldn't figure that one out. So like Flesh decay, no problem. Eyeball color, maybe? We aren't really told. Problem. So he's sending out a little, secret agent up to high and dry who looks like a normal dude, but the eyeball problem, he fixed that. He got goggles, bro. He put on them specs. You know what I'm saying? So nobody can know. So that guy's on his way up to high and dry, and then we're left there. That's a cliffhanger. We're left high and dry.
Hey!
You know what I'm saying? Okay. And then to basically wrap it all up, we got Quint and we got Kellen. What's going on? Where do they go? So we got Quint. He's gonna explore down in the old tech a little bit more, and he's gonna find some place with like a bunch of like vats that seem to be broken open or whatever. Like laboratory style liquid vats. You know what I mean? That seem to house these like giant Titan things. And then he finds one that's still got one in there, and he's like, "Oh my god, I gotta like look at this thing. I gotta do some autopsy because this thing's crazy." And then it kind of like closes its fist or whatever, or shifts its wrist, and then he's like, "Oh my god, this thing's still alive. I better get out of here. It's kind of crazy." But he wants to investigate these people, and he believes that they are related to the Coin Empire. That wasn't maybe the old tech, that this is even an ancienter civilization who was responsible for why there's metal shards around Chamil to begin with. Oh, so very interesting. So another kind of cliffhanger teasing the future. And last but not least, we got Kellen. What's Kellen doing? We don't even know what he was doing here to begin with. He didn't really do much. But what's he doing now? Well, he's taking his boo thing or whatever. Maybe they're just friends. I don't know. But he's taking Amalia, and they going out into the woods, and they're just like looking around. And Kellen finds an omen path. And he's like, "Oh, man, I knew there'd be an omen path out here because my daddy wants to meet me." And then Amalia's like, "Oh, that's cool, Kellen." And Kellen says, "Hey, why don't you come with me? You want to come with me?" And Amalia's like, "Well, you know what? Absolutely, of course. I just met you. I would love to go through a multi-dimensional triangular gateway with you." And where does it go? And Kellen's like, "I have no idea. That's how they work, man. And you roll the dice." And she's like, "That's even more comforting. Let's do it." And so they go through the omen path, and then that's it. So bada bing. That is the quick and dirty story of Ixalan for you. Maybe not so quick. There's a lot to cover. But in a very, very third-party perspective overview sense. So, of course, like I mentioned, go check out the rest of the story in the description below if you would like to hear more and in more detail and probably a little bit more accurate. But as it stands, what do we think, John? John, what do you think about this? Tell me, brother. What do we think about the story?
I want to make sure my opinion is not misconstrued here. I was blown away with my expectations for the Wilds of Eldraine story. And how that relates to what I'm about to say is I was a little less blown away, to be 100% honest. I think there are a lot of things that the set that we will get into over the next little while here did really well. But the story at a lot of points felt a little generic. And I felt like we don't really know why any of these situations started, and most of them didn't get a resolution. So I feel like we got an odd snapshot of like a bunch of people were doing a bunch of things. We saw some of it, and most of it didn't resolve, and then Kellen, who's like our new main character, went, "Oh yeah, I was here for this. Bye." And that's kind of how I felt. I mean, what about you, man?
Yeah, so I don't know. It's interesting. Me and John were talking about this a little bit, and like, not to go too into like some crazy philosophical depths, right? But like, it's weird in the modern world, right? Like, we have such an inundation of information sharing and creative platforms, and so much has expanded in the last, like, literally, like, since the game has existed in the last 30 years. The world is so different. Storytelling is so accessible, and ideas are just rampant, right? So it's very hard to come up with something that's truly unique and encapsulating at all times. And I think like Magic in a general sense does a really good job. I, in this instance, like John, I don't really love this story too much, which is not my feeling about the set, which again, like John mentioned, we're going to get into. But the story for me in a lot of ways feels a bit cookie cutter. And again, maybe that's not entirely like the fault of like writers, like just simply that things have been done before. But I mean, we just got off of this like popularity with The Last of Us, right? Like obviously the video game series was really awesome, but then we just got the television series, and this kind of idea of like I don't know, fungal based threats has kind of been passed along. I think even like World War Z had something to do with fungus, right? That was Brad Pitt like a billion years ago. But like, yeah. I don't know, this idea of like, like the threat of like cordyceps and like even just like aerosolized like kind of spore viruses, things like that have been like kind of a little bit of a trending thing, I feel like, in fantasy based settings. So the introduction of the new threat into Magic that kind of follows that vein, I don't know, it doesn't feel very ingenuitous when it arrives, because it's been done, and it's not, everything's been done at this point, but it doesn't really feel too differentiated to be that interesting. In addition, the vampire quests, which are another kind of big bad, it's just very like, fanatical religious kind of like, the Bat God, we want the Bat God, we don't care what he's gonna do, we don't know how we get there, we don't know anything, we need the Bat God, and that requires sacrifice. Okay, so they're just gonna sacrifice 1 billion people, and like that's what makes them bad. So they're over here, they're sacrificing people, and they get to the God, and he's like, sacrifice me some more people because I'm bad. You know what I mean? Like he's like, I want to shut off the sun because I'm a bad guy. And that's what I do. Yeah. I'm Acklazotz, baby. I'm gonna shut down the sun. There's nothing you can do about it. Like for me, like our major threats in the narrative feel very like, I don't know, a little bit of like a weaker motif on like motives. And for me, like I'm a person who is really impassioned by villains and well-written characters. It's the reason I love the original saga with the Phyrexian, all the way back in the Brothers War, like the OG Brothers War, not the set but the novel. It's why I love it so much, because I think original Phyrexia was an awesome villain and written so well, and I understand that was a different time in life. But anyway, so long story short, I'm not so passionate about it. There are like small little hints and elements that I like, but my passion for the set comes more in the card, the art, the cards, the art, the world building, things of that nature, not necessarily the story that elapses. However, we were left quite a few loose ends, so kind of seeing where those loose ends get let out to could make some of these things a little bit more relevant or a little bit more impactful in a way that I resonate with them a little bit more, right? So, it's left to be seen. But, of course, let us know what you think of the story down in the comments section below, or jump over on our Discord to talk all things lore with us as well, because we are itching to hear if we are the only ones with this thought and opinion. But now that we've covered the story of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, we are going to dive into the actual cardboard, baby, and we're going to talk some mechanics. See you there. All right, so for our first mechanic, we have Discover, and we're going to put up a card here for you guys to look at. We are looking specifically at Zoyoa's Justice, so you can take a peek at that while we read what Discover does. So Discover, as we can see here in the reminder text, is that you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with the mana value indicated in the Discover ability, or less. You then get to cast it without paying its mana cost, or you can put it into your hand. Then you put the rest onto the bottom in a random order. So Discover here is more or less what people have been coining as a fixed cascade, if you will. Mm-hmm. So instead of being based on directly whatever spell you're casting with Discover, or Discover as an ETB, so on and so forth, instead of being based on that card's mana value, it is based on whatever the Discover value is. So Discover will say Discover blank, Discover X, Discover 8, so on and so forth. And then you will cascade basically relevant to that number. The only other difference here is that if you do hit something you don't want to cast, you do get the opportunity to put that into your hand, which is very nice, and I think why people are calling it kind of fixed cascade in that way, because it doesn't screw you if you run into like an X cost spell or something where you don't have an opportunity to feed mana into it. You don't completely lose that card. You do get to put it back into your hand, or into your hand rather, in a general sense. The only other difference here, obviously, is that it is not necessarily a cast trigger. So Cascade being something where when you cast the spell, you get to Cascade. There are going to be cards that have ETBs to discover, or just tap to discover, so on and so forth. So it opens up the ability to a little bit more utilization across cards. But that's basically what we have here for Discover. And in an example here, obviously you can see this is a 2-mana instant, 1 of the red. The owner of target artifact or creature with a mana value of 1 or greater shuffles it into their library. Then that player discovers X, where X is its mana value. So you can see at least a little bit of an example of how that could work in an interesting way. I actually really like Zoyoyo's Justice here. It's Chaos Warp-esque to me. I think this card is going to be really cool in Commander. But either way, let's move on to our next mechanic. John, what do we got?
Our next mechanic is a bit of a doozy. Our mechanic is Descend. So Descend has a couple different things that it's looking at, but in a general sense, to Descend is to put a permanent card into a graveyard from anywhere. Very like Sir Conrad style, like you're taking a permanent and it's entering your graveyard. What that means and how we look at that changes based on the cards. The first card we're taking a look at is Akawali, the Seething Tower. I love this card. He's a 3/3 for 3 in Golgari colors that has one of the checks where it just checks your Descend. So he reads Descend 4. As long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, Akawali gets +2/+2 and has Trample. The second half of his text is Descend 8. As long as there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, Akawali gets an additional +2/+2 and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. So, aside from Akawali being a big mushroom beefcake, I like that he checks how many of these cards are in your graveyard. If there's none or up to 3, nothing happens. Once you hit a threshold of 4, this ability becomes relevant. Once a threshold of 8, that becomes relevant. However, there are other ways we're going to look at Descend. The next being the card Molten Collapse, a 2-mana card that says choose 1. If you descended this turn, you may choose both instead. So, if you have descended, meaning if a permanent card was put into your graveyard from anywhere, you then get to choose both of these abilities. I like this card. It's basically a Dreadbore. It's a 2-mana sorcery speed. The first option of the 2 you can choose is destroy target creature or planeswalker. But of course, the other option, destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with Maluvana. You guys heard it here, Maluvan, it's a new thing. Mana value, 1 or less. So you get a little bit of an option here, but the focus is the Descend ability is a check. If you have done this thing, you are able to do something else with the card. The third thing we're looking at is the card Souls of the Lost. It's a 2-mana star and star +1. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card or sacrifice a permanent, and then Fathomless Descent. They word this one a little differently. So, Souls of the Lost power is equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. So we're not looking at like, if you've done X amount, do this. We're not looking, have you done this? We're saying, count up all the things that count as something that would have descended, and that is applied to the ability on this card. The last, and I think this one is a unique, we did talk about this, I'm 99% sure. The only one that has is, of course, our big bad, the Myco Tyrant, a 3-mana star with Trample. His power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control that are fungi and or saplings. So very Gave, Guru of Spores style card here. And then at the beginning of your end step, create X 1/1 black fungus creature tokens with this creature can't block, where X is the number of times you have descended this turn. So, the end of it, you're going to count up all of the descended triggers you would have gotten, and that is going to be your value for X. So Descend, being this kind of multifaceted mechanic, is very unique in that it's one word, one thing, and they're kind of taking that mechanic and applying it to multiple different checks, multiple kinds of checks, and that gives it like a much broader thing on what the mechanic and the word itself means, as opposed to what the individual cards can do with it. What is our next mechanic?
Well, next up, we got kind of like a tropic mechanic, if you will, at this point. We've seen a bunch of different like land specific typings now, kind of cropping up, like if you remember deserts. Now we have caves. Just similar. So there's going to be some cards that synergize with them. Well, let's take a look at a cave here. We got Forgotten Monument up on the screen. This is a land type cave that can tap for a waste, or it also has a passive ability that says other caves you control have tap, pay 1 life, and add 1 mana of any color. I think that's particularly strong, actually. This idea of turning all your caves into a City of Brass. And there's some pretty sweet synergies regarding around caves, but the card themselves is relatively simple. It's just a new, sub-land type that is going to have some extraneous synergy. So let's look at one of them. We got the card Cosmium Confluence for you. It's 4 generic and a green at a sorcery. You can choose 3. You can choose the same mode more than once. You can either search your library for a cave card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle, or put 3 +1/+1 counters on a cave you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste until... Oh, no, never, not until end of turn. It's just still a land. Or you can destroy target enchantment. So, of course, it's pretty simple here. This mechanic isn't like altogether that deep. It's like deserts. Here you got a thing that can search up caves and put them out, possibly, alive your caves if you're into animating the lands, which your boy Dan and John, we always be trying to do this. So maybe caves will be the answer. Probably not. But anyway, caves are interesting. Some of the cave cards are actually really strong. But generally speaking, it's something we've seen before. And then we got another new mechanic here, which is crafting. Crafting is very, very interesting. So we're going to throw up the Throne of the Grim Captain here for you to take a look. It is a 2-mana legendary artifact with tap to mill 2, or has a very lengthy text here. It says to craft with a dinosaur, a merfolk, a pirate, and a vampire, and 4 generic mana. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, let's read the reminder text. So, it says 4 generic mana, tap, exile this artifact. Exile the 4 from among permanents you control and or cards in your graveyard. That's a big one. And then return this card transformed under its owner's control. Craft only as a sorcery. So a couple things going on here. Basically, this is a traditional kind of transform effect, but a new way to access it. Which, even though this card is a little bit of a unique choice to put up here because it's kind of more of the wackadoo one, effectively what's going to happen is you're going to have a variable craft cost, which is going to be this mana cost associated with the ability. And then you're also going to have this kind of like almost sacrificial cost, if you will, where you're going to have to exile whatever the card with craft is, in addition to some other pieces. It could be creatures, it could be other artifacts, it could be an enchantment, so on and so forth. It really can be anything. And then once you've paid both of those costs, the sacrificial cost or the exile cost and the generic cost, you get to transform your artifact or what have you, whatever thing with craft, depending on what they decide to put it on moving into the future, unless it's like an isolated set ability. But I think the really cool part about craft here is the fact that we have the ability to craft from cards either in play or from our graveyard, which I think makes this much more versatile and actually like usable. But anyway, just to finish looking at an example here, the flip side of our Throne of the Grim Captain, if you are able to get this insane cost paid, it's going to turn into a 7/7 with Menace, Trample, Lifelink, Hexproof. And whenever the Grim Captain attacks, each opponent sacrifices a non-land permanent. Then you may put an exiled creature card used to craft the Grim Captain onto the battlefield under your control, tapped and attacking. This thing is crazy, obviously, because it's almost impossible to actually access it. Somebody out there, make me a commander deck with this thing in it. Come and destroy me with it. I will love you until the end of time. This sounds like a lot of fun. I love some wackadoo stuff like this, but I think craft in general has a lot of interesting applications. However, we got one more mechanic to talk about. John, what do we got?
The last mechanic we're going to look at is actually a new kind of counter. We're talking about finality counters. Finality counters are basically giving a counter to an ability or a kind of a set of text we've already seen. But let's take a look at our example. We got the Soul Coil Viper, a 3-mana 2/3. You can tap a black mana and tap it and sacrifice the Viper. You then get to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with finality counter on it. Activate only as a sorcery. If a creature with a finality counter on it would die, exile it instead. So all we're really doing here is giving a simpler way to talk about the reanimation ability of, but if this creature dies, you exile it. That's really all it is. It's confining that ability, but as opposed to putting it into a new mechanic, a new italicized ability in the text box, we're making it a counter. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, for sure. So I think in a general sense, all these mechanics that are introduced here are relatively interesting. In my my personal take. Obviously, my favorite here is Descend. Probably your favorite as well. I think Descend is interesting. I do think Descend is slightly problematic because of its multiplicitous applications. It's one of those abilities that isn't really like an ability. It's a keyword that's not really a keyword. It's just a word that kind of draws your attention to a concept. This in the sense being the concept of permanence in your graveyard, them entering your graveyard, them already being in your graveyard, so on and so forth. However, that being said, I do like it, and I think it kind of pushes a design space that's rather interesting, and cards that can trigger off specifically things entering your grave from anywhere or leaving your grave. I think that's very interesting because it's not just directly feeding into stereotypical aristocratic sacrifice engines, because you can trigger it with your discards, you can trigger it with your mill, things that go direct to grave from library, from hand, from exile, from whatever. If it's going into your grave from anywhere, you can get this Descend check, which I think is really cool. I also I really like obviously I talked about it, but I really like Discover. I think it opens the door for a lot more versatility of application with respect to Cascade based effects. And I think one of the downsides to Cascade was that it was only on a cast trigger, which limited the amount of times you could access Cascade, especially with Commander and the huge density of kind of cheaty paths, if you will. But being able to now staple it onto even an ETB, and then being able to handicap that by making sure to adjust the Discover number to make sense with whatever avenue the trigger is coming from. I think that it opens up the design space for Cascade into a lot more play, which is really cool to me. I really dig it. The rest of the mechanics here, they're all right. You know what I mean? Finality counters are all right. I like the idea of being able to potentially counter manipulate with that, which I know, you're brewing a deck that has something to do with that maybe. But I do think that's an interesting portion of it. But what do you think? What do you think about the mechanics?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Discover. I like that they kind of modulated Cascade as somebody who's always loved flipping cards at random off the top of my library and random casts. I think that the Discover gives us really interesting opportunity. I like that there could be some design space where you have a really high mana costed card, but instead of discovering 10, maybe you discover 3, 3 times. Or you take a really low mana card and give it some ridiculous ability to discover, 2 mana, discover 12, but then there's some extreme downside. For each card you flipped while discovering, you lose 2 life. I think there's just such a high potential for them to do stuff with it. That's really neat. The other, believe it or not, I like that finality counters and Descend and Craft all kind of feel like they can function together. I like that for Descending, you're putting things in your graveyard. Finality counters interact with you bringing things out of your graveyard. And Crafting then being the kind of thing where you have to have something on the field or in your graveyard with a specific intent. I like that almost... So you bring something back with a finality counter. Well, then maybe I do want to craft with it because I'm exiling stuff out of my grave. So even if I'm killing the thing on board, it's exiling anyway. I just think that those three things play together in a very interesting way. And I'm really excited in a general sense to brew with all of those things as somebody who will continue to love cards that deal with the graveyard and filling them and removing them and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very excited to play with that. But now that we're finished going over the slew of new mechanics in the Lost Caverns, let's get into our top picks for new commanders. So, we're going to get into our top picks for new commanders, and I will be starting off with our absolutely heart-wrenching loss of Inti, the Seneschal of the Sun. I don't know what a Seneschal is, but evidently it wasn't that important because he's dead. So, for 1 and a red, you get yourself a 2/2 legendary creature human knight. It says, whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains trample until end of turn. It also reads, whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next end step. So, I love Impulse. This is a phenomenal engine for I'm going to discard cards to buff my creatures and also Impulse draw. I think it is almost a necessity in mono red decks to really get the gas going to have that increased draw. But it lends itself to, sure, I'm impulse drawing, blah, 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 blah. But I also just want to make fat creatures and give them trample and punch people in the mouth. So I like that I can have this nice, fancy, intricate, card advantage spiciness of the impulse draw, while at the same time just punching somebody in the face. Those two things coalesce nicely. So I also think it's really cool that if you don't want to do the whole shebang, you're able to, maybe you just want to build a deck where I'm discarding cards and throwing them into the graveyard to make really, really strong, punchy trampling guys. That's really cool. Or maybe you don't want to worry about the +1/+1 counters as much and you just want to go for a discard impulse draw deck. Cards where you're able to discard cards to draw, then allowing you to get that additional trigger of an impulse draw. I think there's some really implications there and he'd be a really fun build around.
Yeah, actually, at first I wasn't a huge Inti supporter, but the more I think about him, the more I like him, especially listening to you talk about it. I like this guy for a few reasons. The first one being that he's 2 CMC. I love cheap commanders. I'm obsessed with them. It feels so good to always have that early game play in the pocket. I just have always loved that. The other 2 things I really like about this guy are, one, he's mono red, but he pushes like you were saying, an aggro kind of direction, which a lot of times these impulse based guys beg you to do spell based directions, instants and sorceries, think like Urabrask. When you have a guy that's kind of pushing you in an impulse draw direction that wants you to still be going for blood, into combat, that's kind of interesting because it can inform your build around if you do kind of try to look at him holistically. The second thing I like is that his second ability has that restriction of whenever you discard 1 or more cards. So it doesn't work as well with things like wheels. Think Wheel of Fortune or whatever. If you were to, or I don't know, whatever have you. If you were to discard your entire hand to attempt to get a refill, you're only going to get a singular impulse. So I think it's an interesting build around to think about trying to get as many instances of 1 card discards as possible. Obviously he has his own trigger, but there are many other examples in which you can do just maybe 1 quick little discard to draw a rummage, you know what I mean? This guy in a rummage typal, a bunch of rummage triggers out there, you're going to discard, draw, impulse, you know what I mean? It turns all of your rummages into just big whomping plays. I just think it's really cool. So I like him too. But moving on, we got my pick for one of the top commanders here with the Caparakti Sunborn, who is a 2 generic, a red and a white for a 4/4 legendary creature human soldier, who says whenever he attacks, you may tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. If you do, you discover 3. So I really like this card for a couple reasons, mainly because it's a way to take advantage of the new Discover mechanic in a slightly more unique fashion. Also because you guys know me, I'm a Magic hipster. This boy's sitting here at an uncommon. He's not too cracked, so I don't think he's going to get a lot of numbers up on the the charts, if you will. So I do like to crack some spicy eggs on occasion. And I think this guy looks really cool for that purpose. The number one thing I think is interesting, especially the implications in the modern world here, are the fact that he allows you to tap up to 2 untapped artifacts, not just creatures. Sometimes creatures can be a little bit harder to interact with in this fashion. Of course, if they have vigilance, they could still be used to tap and go to combat for the nature of his ability, since it is an attack trigger. But I think it's especially cool, the implications with this with respect to that junk style artifacts. If you have a bunch of clues or treasures or any of the crazy things lying around nowadays, maps or whatnot, and you don't plan to utilize them for their activated ability, they can just sit here and allow you to do your discover trigger each time. Of course, we have top deck fixing. We have multi-combat steps. We can duplicate this trigger because it's a trigger with things like, Strionic Resonator, so on and so forth. So I think that this is a really interesting kind of build path to get some juice out of the discover mechanic. Also, discover being restricted here to discover 3 is another kind of one of those restricted build arounds, which me and John absolutely love on the comfort zone, and we're obsessed with things like the companion restrictions. So I think this adds a lot of really interesting build directions to take.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. He's another one that, like you said, I saw it uncommon, and I'm like, well, he kind of has a very specific thing he's looking to do to trigger that, but there are a lot of things you could do with it. I mean, discover 3, so whatever you want that is in that realm, whether you're going for, maybe you want to discover to get some spells, maybe you're looking to get some extra permanents out during the combat for the rest of your turn. Like, I think that there's a lot of cool stuff he could do. I specifically am really excited to slot him into my soldier deck, because making lots of tokens, I probably have like 4 or 5 instances of vigilance in that deck, and he would slide nicely to get a bunch more of my low cost soldier creatures out and about.
Yeah.
My next pick for an interesting commander here is Zioa the Lava Tongue. We're going for another 2-mana 2/2 for me here. He's a Goblin Warlock for Rakdos colors. He has Death Touch, and at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, each opponent may discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Zioa deals 3 damage to each opponent who didn't. So I think he, kind of similarly to the way some of those Doctor Who cards did that villainous choice, something bad is going to happen to you, but you get to decide what. I like that he kind of, okay, well, maybe you have a lot of cards, but your permanents are really valuable, so I'm going to discard. Maybe you have an overflowing of stuff on the battlefield, and you don't have a lot of cards in your hand, you can sack the permanent. And if you really don't want to do either one of those things, you take the 3 life and you call it a day. I think he's a very... I know you don't want to. I don't know if I'm going to want to, but I just think that he's a really cool, let's get if you descended, it's the beginning of your end step, so he's not something where you're going to be doing on everybody's turn. It's going to become this, overwhelming, oh my gosh, I have no hand, I have no board, I have no life. But I just think the Rakdos colors giving a trying to descend every turn, it's going to go so well into so many sacrifice builds. I think he's a cool commander though, and that he gives that bad choice, but I like giving my opponents options, and he is a good option for me to give those options to you.
Yeah, I like this guy too, again, because he's a very low cost commander. I also like that I like anything that says each opponent, man. Just trying to find ways to abuse that stuff is super fun. I mean, with this guy, the way I kind of think about him is obviously I would assume you're going to be getting that damage choice most often than not. Obviously, life is a resource. People don't want to lose their stuff. But you can really make that choice super hard when you use things like damage duplicators, doublers, triplers, so on and so forth. There's a lot of that stuff now, and that's really cool with this guy, because it's not a loss of life, it is damage dealt by him, that you can abuse that and make that damage pip so much more threatening. I mean, if that damage is tripled, that's a take 9. Now it's a hard choice. Do you want to take 9, sack a thing, or discard a card? forcing like huge chunks of life versus resource depletion puts people back up against a wall. And because it doesn't literally force the resource depletion, I think that this like doesn't necessarily fall into that dangerous territory of like, oh, like it's oppressive and an anti-fun. I think this really says like you're going to take some damage and he's cheap, and you can either build like, I don't know, you could build a bunch of interesting stuff. You could focus on, you know, again, like rummaging or cycling, where you have these small instances of descend just to get your trigger off, or you could do some kind of weird Rakdos like mill style deck. Like it's a very interesting, like, how am I going to get my descend trigger off is your first question. And then how am I going to make this decision hurt is your second question. I think both are really interesting. So I do really like it. And my next pick here is definitely going to be a weirdie. We are going with Tetsin, the Gnome Champion. This is a legendary artifact creature gnome that says whenever Tetsin or another double-faced artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you mill 3 cards. Then you may put an artifact card from among them into your hand. Then he has our new ability, Craft, which if you guys saw the mechanics section, you now are a master of. He crafts with 6 artifacts and for 4 generic. And then he's a 2/2 to start on his front side. If you then craft him, you get to flip him onto his backside, and he becomes the Golden Gear Colossus. He's a legendary artifact creature gnome, 6/6 with vigilance and trample. And whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks, you transform up to one other target double-faced artifact you control and create 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens. His flavor is also the sum is greater than the parts, which is interesting. Anyway, I really like Tetsin. He's one of the like commander includes that isn't in the commander sets, which is always interesting to sneak a peek at those. And I think Tetsin is, I don't know, he's just wackadoo. And you know me, like I love wackadoo stuff. Now, I'm on the fence with this guy. I was even on the fence even putting him up here because he's a bit pigeonholed, which is another thing I don't necessarily love. Like this is a guy where like I don't see a lot of build paths if you're not doing the double-faced artifact build path. However, with that build path, who the heck out there is making a double-faced artifact deck? Like with that as the theme? If it's you, way to go. You're my type of guy. But it might be me now because this thing is nutty. There's a bunch of crazy ones out there that this thing just cracks open. I don't remember the name, but we were talking about the one earlier today where basically John has it a bunch of decks, but it's like a 1-mana artifact or 2, something of that nature. And then throughout the game, you can pay 1, tap it, and like exile a card out of your hand. And once you do that like 5 times or whatnot, you get to flip it. And it becomes a land that taps for mana equal to your life total. Yeah, that thing is like not very good, although we have included it in some decks because it's very hard to get that off. Like even because it's a tap trigger and you have to be exiling cards out of your hand. I mean, you're talking about like a potential 5 turns and 5 cards down to get that to flip. Our boy Tetsin here, the Golden Gear Colossus, that thing ETBs, zoomp. You got a land that taps for 40, baby. That's pretty nuts. There's a lot of the stuff this card breaks open. It's too early days, and to be honest with you, I am not rules master enough to understand this, but I did see somewhere in the the whispers of Reddit that apparently Tetsin can flip the Mightstone Meekstone and get you Urza Planeswalker. Now, I don't know if that's true, and this is where I'm asking y'all, any of my rules people out there, let me know if this is how that works. Because apparently, I guess, if he tries to flip the artifact, it is its transformed side, and because it's flipping via the means of the Golden Gear Colossus, and it doesn't care about its initial conditions, it works? I don't know. If it does, this boy's crazy. This is a weirdo. Look at him. Look at that thing. He just a little gear boy with some little swollen little calves there, just ready to gear up the world. I love him.
I mean, I think he, like you said, he's pigeonholed, but I do think he's super neat. If he does break open Urza Planeswalker, as much as that's pretty strong, the condition on flipping this boy is 6 artifacts. So at least you're going to be getting rid of 6 other pieces of nonsense in exchange for one very big nonsensical piece of nonsense. But overall, bring on the gnomes, man. Bring them on. Bring them on. I'm very excited. My next pick is the other Commander Not Commander Include card. We're talking about Xavier Sol, the Infested Captain. He is a 1 black, 1 green, and 1 blue mana, 3/3, so a Sultai human fungus pirate, who says tap, remove a counter from another permanent you control, populate, activate only as a sorcery. He also says tap, sack another creature, proliferate, also activate only as a sorcery. So I'm not entirely sure how I got on the idea of this manipulation of counters. Dan kind of hinted at it earlier, this whole finality counter, but I was thinking, what if I made a deck where I can like reanimate some stuff and then through counter manipulation remove the finality counters, or maybe even move the finality counters. And I was like, man, if only they were printing a card that would let me do some Descend stuff and do some finality counter stuff, and I want it to be in Sultai colors because it's one of my favorite color combinations, and they spoiled this guy like later that day, and I was thrilled. So I think that the fact that he has like, let me proliferate stuff, and I also require human sacrifice, but he's like, also, I'm going to populate tokens and I'm going to remove counters from things. I feel like those are 4 very different things, and he does all of them. And I just think that leads him that he could be very interesting in a whole lot of different decks. But I definitely know where I'm going to be putting him. So.
Yeah, I think this guy's crazy. And that's a true story, by the way. We literally were talking about this thing because we were talking about... our sweet baby boy, Uncle Ben, Ook Benbach.
I love him!
He was our original conversation piece for John's commander that would do something with finality counters and Descend, which you'll see him later in another section, so don't worry about it. You don't have to start Googling quite yet. But we were talking about it, and John was literally being like, oh, man, I just wish it was like Sultai. And straight up that day, this guy comes out, and like I'm at work taking, the old scroll through the spoilers in my small little break there, and I see this guy, and I'm like, yo, what? I couldn't even believe my eyes. I thought this was fake. Like, straight up, it just seemed way too coincidental. But it definitely plays into exactly what you want to do, and I just want to see what you're going to do with it. So that's why I'm excited about this guy. He ain't for me because he's for you, but that's awesome, and I want to get decimated by him on the channel. So we'll see. My last pick here is going to be one of the Jurassic Park includes with Indominus Rex Alpha. So I was hesitant about the whole Jurassic Park thing going in. You guys know us. We're kind of like, we're on the fence with Universe and Beyond on occasion. It depends on what IP, we like some of them. Some of them we're like, a little bit whatever about, but like, Jurassic Park, come on. Dino boy. You guys know me. Dinos be giving me that life. I'm one of them paleontology boys, I was one of those guys that like my little like kid library was just books that like the name of the book was like a dinosaur name. Like I got like Ankylosaurus the book. Tyrannosaurus the book, Diplodocus the book, right? So like I don't know, dinos get me jazzed. So Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, the whole franchise there, very interesting to me. I never saw the last Jurassic Worlds because I heard things got a little weird with like human cloning and stuff, and like, I don't know if that's exactly for me. But I did see the one with Indominus, and I love him. Look at this guy. Look at that art. This guy's insane. The art is beautiful. I just like the idea of using another big bad Diny. I got my dinosaur deck, if you guys have seen Dinosaur Train, the video. But let's take a look at the card. So we got 1 generic and 2 Dimir pips, and then 2 green pips for you. So a total of 5 for a legendary creature, dinosaur mutant 6/6. It says when he enters the battlefield, you can discard any number of creature cards. It enters with a flying counter on it if a card discarded this way had flying. The same is true for first strike, double strike, death touch, bloody, 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 blah. And then when he enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each counter on it. I don't know, man. I be loving this card because guess what he'd be doing? He does blue stuff. And I love blue stuff, which I've accepted my inner demons, but that's what it is. I love that blue stuff, okay? Why does he do blue stuff? Because he draws cards and he likes to be blinked and stuff and draws you more cards. This man is a value train. So I actually really like him for that exact reasoning, right? Like for me, I imagine playing this guy, like there's some crazy cards out there. I would pull up one. There's like Scavenging Hawk or something that has literally 4 keywords on it. Imagine that interaction, bro. You play this guy, you discard 1 creature. 1 guy. You get 4 counters on him, 4 keywords, and you draw 4. Discard 1, draw 4. Are you crazy? And then you can just blink him and do it again. Why not? Who cares? That's amazing. So I really like this guy. I always wanted to build a deck that used like that scavenger style ability, you know, guys that like look at your graveyard and, you know, have all the activated abilities or keyworded abilities of the things in your graveyard. Think Urborg Scavengers from Aftermath, if you guys are familiar with the card. I really wanted to build a deck, or like Mimeoplasm style, right? But like I didn't want to build the Mimeo. No, I'm too much of a hipster for that. I can't be building no Mimeoplasm. But this guy, I like this guy. I think I could go with that same kind of vibe with this dude. I'll pile some guys in my graveyard that have the keywords. I'll play some scavenger-based dudes who are going to steal some of those keywords while, you know, obviously getting all the max benefit out of Indominus. And then I'm going to beat people in the face with this boy. We're going to straight chonk on them biddies. I think he's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you check the box of Giant Dinosaur, you check the box of Insulti Colors, you check the box that says I'm going to draw some cards. This card is a home run. It's a Giant Dinosaur mutant, and I think that playing against him is going to be awe-striking, to say the least. But as much as we could go on, I'm sure, about pretty much all the other legends in the set, because there's something to be gained from running any of them as your commander, let's get into talking about some of these sick arts.
All right, y'all, you know what time it is. We wouldn't be in the comfort zone if we weren't talking about the art, baby. We love art over here, so we're going to cover some of our top picks for the best art, starting off with one of my picks here. We're going to talk about Whisper Silk Cloak. Now, this is a reprint card coming in the box topper style treatment, so that extended art with new art. Very, very cool. The artist here is going to be Julian Kok-Jun Wen. And then we don't really have to cover what the card does, but come on, guys, peep this thing. I just love this card. I love the art style in the sense of how it fits into the general like cultural identity of the set, as well as this amazing morph effect that they capture here, where obviously the cloak is so like camouflaged in with the wall that it almost just seems like it warps the architecture. The figure is beautiful. This is an A+ art for me. I absolutely love it.
I am bringing up our boy Uncle Ben, Mr. Ook Bin Bak, the Great Mistake. So the only thing about this card that isn't a mistake is the art. Ha! But seriously, so it's by Wolf Skulljack, and this, to me, this art, it's in this like cool like tribal-esque, like, but ancient. So it's not like just face value, it's just like ancient horror. He's like a pile of bones and skeletons. Like, it looks like somebody went into some underground necromancy lab. It was like, I'm just gonna put all the things together and we're gonna see what happens. And it was probably a bad idea. And I just think that it looks so cool, and I think that the art so well resembles the name, and that it looks absolutely insane. I just think it's super interesting. I think this art and the coloration, again, with the blue and the purple, because it's a Dimir color, so like the blue and the black, but the purple is a little bit more interesting to look at. I just think the art was super cool. It almost looks like he's attempting to like break out of that ancient frame and just like come after you, Descend style. So big fan of that art.
Yeah, Word, I actually really like this one too. Just had to jump in. It's the eyes for me, bro. And I love the fact that, like you were saying, it's like this idea that like some necromancer like found a pile of bones and was like just too lazy to even like untangle them. He's like, you know what? This'll work. Yeah, I love that one. Okay, next up here we got the Belligerent Yearling by Siddharth Chaturvedi. By the way, we're not good at pronouncing things, but we're shouting you out because you guys are amazing artists. So there's the credit. Forgive us for being totally non-knowledgeable for random last names across the world. But take a look at this art. Okay, this is Belligerent Yearling. I love this guy. Now, go look at the flavor text for the regular Belligerent Yearling, which I don't believe I ended up including on my flavors, although I may have, so never mind. Pause on that. Wait till I get to the flavor section. But it matches up with the flavor text so good. I know it's not actually on this version of the art, but I just love this version of the art because look at that little guy, okay? It's so cute because he's like so peeved, obviously, and he's got that one little tooth, and he's like, I'm a big bad T-Rex, while also being this tiny little chicken leg boy. I just think he's hilarious. He's adorable. This art is really cool, and I love this treatment they did with a couple of the dinosaurs in this a little kind of like simplified watercolor treatment, which is really, really cool. It's a great job to the artist.
Yeah, I'm a big fan just in general of that style. I think it brings so much more life to the dinosaurs, which I mean, honestly, kind of like funnily like, and they did some Jurassic Park cards in the set, so like bringing life to dinosaurs, like sub-theme, like I think the arts do that really well. My next pick here, we're going to go with another one of these box topper treatments for the Strionic Resonator. This is by Jonas Duro, and I'm a music guy. I love music. I play the musics. I listen to the musics. Music is one of my absolute all-time favorite things, and the original Strionic Resonator to me looks like a tuning fork. But it's not resonating. I don't feel like it's resonating with anything. This art looks like somebody smacked this left side of the Strionic Resonator with like a giant hammer, and it's making this absolutely like ephemeral but also loud sound that you can hear anywhere. Like this thing to me is like top of the thing, like somebody called for aid, they hit the thing, and it made this just absolutely incredible sound, and I think you can feel that and almost hear that in the art. To me, this, like, not only is it just a phenomenal art in itself, I think that it captured something that the original art for me didn't, and I think it was done masterfully. So thank you, Mr. Jonas.
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, I always love when art is able to actually imbibe more than like just like a visual experience, but even that feeling. This really does give you that feeling of that like whoa, 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 whoa. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Just like even just warping the landscape because of the intense vibrations. So, very cool. Next up here, we got the Skull Spore Nexus, specifically in this kind of like more traditionalist wall painting feeling, if you will, very like Mesoamerican style. And this is by Monica Robles Corzo, aka Monorobot. This thing is really awesome. I don't know. There aren't a lot of these. Like, there's a couple of these like special treatments they did in here where they just really didn't do very many of them, but this is my favorite one from this style treatment, and I'll tell you a couple of details I really love here, just because that's the reason I love it so much. If you look at the figure, I just think it's so cool, right? Because you have some sections of the flesh kind of like pulled away to expose these little tiny bone patterns, which already is wicked interesting and neat, because it shows that like kind of vibe of decay in this very geometric, very patternistic style treatment. And then I love, oh my god, how much do I love in the rib cage section where you have that little exposure for the decay where you get the rib cages, and then you have these two little fluted mushrooms sneaking out in between the layers of the rib cage and coming up. You know, you gain like a dimensionality and an attention to detail, and like obviously this thematical treatment with this simplistic art style. I mean, obviously it's extremely intricate, but like simplified shapes and detail in the actual figure. It's amazing. I love this treatment. I love actually all of the ones that were given this exact kind of treatment. I think they're really cool, except maybe like I'd have to relook at Molten Echoes because I think Molten Echoes got one. So I don't want to give people a generalization I can't really like follow up. I don't really remember what that one looks like. Go look at the Molten Echoes one and tell me if it's awesome. But all the other ones I've seen of this specific style treatment, I think are really, really cool. And they just, again, they reinforce that like kind of cultural vibe of the whole set that I think is really interesting. So I love it.
My next pick here is going to be the Bridge from Below. This is an enchantment. It's by Young Hao Han, and I think that this just looks insane to me. Like, when I first saw it, like, I'm scrolling on my phone, and I was like, is it like a black log? Like, I just like wasn't like looking at it. But then when I sat down, I'm like, all right, let me look at some of these arts. This looks insane. And as far as Bridge from Below, like I always thought of it from like, you know, like some sort of like Afterlife, Back to the Battlefield style. But this again, it captures like in the cave. Like, are we at the bottom of the cave, or are we in some sort of afterlife? Or are we going back to the top of Ixalan, or are we reanimating something? Like, to me, this is like a very beautiful, the light kind of shines through. You're almost looking at it from like above, kind of, and you can see the light shining through to light up certain parts of this bridge from below. I think this one was, again, like awe-striking in a way that, like, I feel like very small looking at this, like, intense, epic, creepy but also gorgeous thing, and I just did not expect it when I first saw the card. So when I really took a second to look at it again, I was just like mesmerized by what was done inside that image.
Yeah, this one's cool to me too, from like a lore-based standpoint. I don't really think this was probably the intent, but there is a moment in the lore where the like fungal army is arriving, and Amalia uses her cartography, like blood magic abilities, to create like a giant crevasse, you know, like the cratered area in the masses of the army, and they start falling through, but then they also start kind of just melding together and flopping on top of each other and melting into one another to create a bridge across the crevasse. So I don't really think this is probably what they were going for in this moment, but it feels like that to me. Like you were saying, like it feels like in one of these caves in Ixalan. So like that could be like that deep crevasse and these kind of like decayed fungal kind of like whitewashed powder zombie type things kind of like forming together to create the bridge. So I like this one. I think it's pretty cool. Next up, we got Tashana's Tidebender by Ladania, which this is another different style treatment that I wanted to bring up that I think is really cool. This one is a lot more super vibrant colors, very painterly, which I just think is just really beautiful to look at. I think, like, again, like the set is a very colorful set, probably like one of the most colorful sets we've ever gotten. And this whole like super colorized treatment has this like vibe of almost like a Mardi Gras, but like way more like, you know, traditionalist, if you will. Like, I don't know. I just really love it. And this is probably one of my favorite arts. I love the treatment on the eyes and just the way that you structure the face out of like all of these different kind of like, you know, decompartmentalized color bodies, like color shapes. It's a really cool form. It's a really cool card. There aren't many of these, but most of them are pretty cool. I'm pretty sure there's one for Huatli. Of course, like the one with Quintorius, it's not in this exact same like look, if you will, but it's that treatment of like the high color, high brightness, like lots of different color shapes, and that one is really cool too. So definitely check them out. But this one I like specifically.
Yeah, I love just similarly like the painted nature. Like these to me don't just look like image captured. Like this looks like some kind of like watercolor in motion freeze frame that I think is just like it's something that like even somebody who really likes a lot of art like this to me is like super high conceptual. Like I really like that one as well. My last art pick here is without a doubt, no contest. I will agree to this statement every single time. My absolute favorite art in the entire set. Bringer of the Last Gift by Sidrian. This, to me, it's absolutely horrifying. Aside from what the card does, which I am also in love with, most of the time we get these like demonic evil creatures. It's blacks and it's grays and maybe a little bit of blues, and it's like not super high contrast to what's going on. This thing is elegant and it's evil and it's delectable and it's disgusting all at the same time to me. Like, it's got this like skull face thing and these decaying wings because it's a demon, but at some time it was a vampire, so it's like, is it dead, is it alive? Like, am I looking at a statue, or am I looking at this like nightmarishly haunting creature that is bringing me the last gift that I probably don't want? And like the exposed bones, and like, is it armor, is it part of this thing's corpse? Like, I just think this thing is absolutely the coolest thing. Like, I think the creature that they have created inside this image is exactly what I would have wanted from something that not only has that name, but does what this card does. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I also think this one's pretty cool. You know, like, as far as like the two of us go, like, you're probably like the like evil vibe art fan more than me, which is not to say I don't like this thing, but like, obviously, like, this is right up your alley. I like it for sure. I really like the crystalline elements. Like, I like that he has these little like crystalline growths on his forearms and also on the shoulder plates there. I do like the like clad in gold armor effect, and I love that in the background you see this like vortex of bones kind of like coming in his wake. So like, for all those reasons, I agree with you. And the skeletons on this are actually like incredibly well drawn, very well detailed. But we love the art. Hopefully you do too. And there's a lot to digest with this set. So definitely at some point during the incredible epic that is this video, take a pause, take a break, go get a snack, and go check out all the different variants and arts. It is wild, man, I'm telling you. But with art, there also comes the flavor. So we about to go to Flavor Town, baby. Strap in.
So, as we get into the flavor here, I'm going to start with the flavor text on the Earthshaker Dreadmaw. And I've seen a bunch of stuff online about another Dreadmaw. Hooray, we're all very excited. But the flavor text on some of the cards in this set, to me, were honestly, aside from just serious, were hilarious. So the flavor text on this card is, I suggest we leave this cavern for someone else to conquer. Amalia, the Master Cartographer. That, I just imagine like Amalia and all the vampires at Kellen, they're like trotting through and they see this thing and they just go, and they just turn right around and they go a different direction because they realize it's not worth it, and that's hilarious.
Yeah, this is definitely like a oops, nah, absolutely not type of situation. I mean, look at the scale on that thing. Awesome flavor. And next up, we got Life Finds a Way. Now, this is one of the Jurassic Park things, and this is a direct quote from the Jurassic Park movie. So we'll still read it for you, though. But the flavor here is life breaks free. It expands to new territories and crashes through barriers, painfully, maybe even dangerously. But, well, there it is. So I really like this one, and I picked this one because it is a direct quote from the movie. And this is one of those situations I just want to give a shout out to R&D. I think, you know, again, it's one of those situations where a lot of times when they bring in, you know, Universes Beyond products and other IPs, you know, I'm always hesitant at first, and then it is treated, in my opinion, just so masterfully. You know what I mean? Like, this card is a really cool card that ties together so many awesome moments from the movie. You know, its implications to its ability, the name of the card, Life Finds a Way, as well as that direct quote from Ian Malcolm. It's just like, I don't know. It's one of those situations where I doubt it at first, and then they give me cards like this, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like, I don't know. This is a moment I like from the movie. This is a moment, like a quote that's popular and awesome from the movie that is not just like stapled onto a card that makes no sense, and not just kind of like thrown in here. At least it's not treated with the feeling it gets thrown in here just to scrape some, you know, extra cash off the fact that we get to call out an IP that already has an established like following and market. This feels more like it's paying homage to true fans of that material and wanting to bring it into this universe. for that reason, I wanted to bring one of these up here as a shout out. I think the design space here was really well done and really cool.
Yeah, nah, I'm right there with you. I think that the fact that they were able to not only use the direct quote, but use it in a way that felt absolutely purposeful. Like, if I didn't know it was a direct quote, I would have gone, wow, that is a phenomenal flavor text for that card and for what it's doing. So the fact they were able to find the perfect spot for it, like, phenomenal. I am going to hit us with another kind of silly one here. We got the hammer that evidently they used to hit that Stronic Resonator in the flavor text for Colossus Hammer, because his hammer is enormous. The flavor text here is, relic retrieval is delayed. Mentioning it was 40 feet tall might have helped us prepare. Queens Bay Company Dispatch. So I imagine, like, these people are working so hard to bring this. They're like, we found a super cool artifact. You guys gotta go get it. Oh, okay, cool. Let's bring, like, some of our normal tools. And they look at it and they go, you want us to bring this up there? Like, no wonder there were no people left in the mining town. They needed 8,000 people to lift one hammer, and that's where they all went. And evidently that wasn't one of the places Malcolm went to look. Again, that's just so funny to me, and it really paints, like, I don't know if I realized the Colossus Hammer was supposed to be that large, but +10 is quite a bit, so we'll go with it.
Next up, we got another funny one. I like this one a lot. This is on Squirming Emergence here, which you gotta note the art in order to appreciate the flavor text fully. But our flavor text here says, due to archaic Brazen Coalition guidelines regarding hats, a few mycoids are now technically pirate captains. Which I just think is really funny, like, just to call that out. Because, again, on the art here, we have this, like, just random fungal, amalgam creature that seems to have attached itself to some pirate skull that happens to have a hat on it. And due to some ridiculous rules of piratery, it is now a pirate captain, which is very, like, Jack Sparrow, I need my hat type of deal to me, and I find that just really funny, especially in conjunction with the art. This one's really fun.
Nah, I'm a big fan of the card. The art's funny, and the flavor text captures, I think, that comedic nature perfectly. Next card for me here is going to be Terror Tide. The flavor text here for Terror Tide is going to be a little bit different than the last two cards I read, so strap in for that. Those who go under rise again as cruel mockeries of their former selves, spewing foul water and keening with sorrow. Damn. Like, that's, when I was looking at the card, I liked the card. Phenomenal card. I want like 80 copies of this card. But aside from that, wow. Like that, again, if we talked before about art that made me hear stuff, we're talking about, like, I'm listening to the screams of these drowning people as I'm reading that flavor text. Like, they're the waves washing over them, and you see the corpses of the people that were dragged over last come back to the front of the water as this tide, like, rolls in and out and over, and that's just, like, really, really intense.
Yeah. Also, this thing be playing on the fact that we all know drowning freaking sucks, bro. Who the heck wants to drown? Water itself is a terror tide. This thing just takes that and makes it like 10 times worse. Yeah, I like it. All right, last up here we got Glimpse the Core, which is a fun little sorcery. Again, this is another one that kind of like plays off the art here, where it looks like we're coming up to some like awe-striking moment. And very simple flavor text here by Wada, which is just, wow. It's a good thing we brought a poet, which I think is a really fun nod to, like, the fact that, like, again, obviously they're seeing this, like, magnanimous, like, brilliant little perspective, and this is just a little coy remark that's captured in the flavor text here. It's just really funny. I like these down-to-earth moments that they build into the flavor that kind of help to, like, take all the epic craziness and filter it into, like, a little bit more of, like, a humorous, humanistic little tone. So I really appreciate it. Flavor in this set is really cool, but it's time for some of our top picks, baby. All right, y'all, we made it to the colloquial top 10, which is by what metric, you ask? I don't know, by the comfort zone metric. We got no exact reason for this. Not necessarily the top 10 most powerful, although some of these are definitely powerful. It could be anything. Top 10 cards we're really excited to use that are also strong, that we think are really versatile, or just cool in a general sense. However, before we get to the top 10, we're going to cover some honorable mentions, just because these are a few cards we think are either extremely strong or just worth mentioning, even though we didn't necessarily explicitly put them into the top 10. So the first one up here, we got the Hulking Raptor. It was a 2 generic and 2 green for a 5/3 with Ward 2. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you add 2 green. This guy is on the honorable mentions because, dang, bro. Whoa. How you going to be a 4-mana card coming out with that 5 power, coming on with that, of course, that stapled on there Ward 2, because everything needs Ward, and then you're going to be giving me 2 extra mana every combat? This thing is crazy. There's definitely a world in Magic where this thing would have cost at least 5, if not 6. Like a few years back, before power creep pushed us to where we are currently, this thing definitely would have been sitting up there as like a 5 to 6 CMC card, and it wouldn't have seen hardly any play. But this thing's sitting here at 4, bro. Ludicrous. I mean, there was a freaking enchantment that it was one of like the cons whatever cycle that was like literally did the whole add 2 green thing, and it was like a 4-mana enchantment. It didn't give you no 5/3 body with protection. It didn't give you no dinosaur. This guy's nuts.
All right, next here, we're going to talk about the 5, so to speak, gods of the Lost Caverns here. Not going to read through all 5 of them, but they're all very powerful. They're all very interesting. They all have like a very directed path here, whether they're in the 99 or they're in your command zone, and they all flip over into lands and have a way to kind of, you have the god, and then if it dies, you flip it to the thing, and then if you satisfy the land condition, you flip it back into the god, which I thought that's really cool. I'm excited to see where these pop up. Because they all have very specific things they're doing. I'm kind of excited to see where they go, but they are all very powerful, and very excited for another cool set of things that there are 5 of. I'm a big fan of those, as you guys well know.
Yeah, I love the fact that these guys have that whole, like, I die, I become a land, and the land turns me back into the guy, and, like, all the lands are based on, like, the idea of like these temples giving sacrament or whatever to the actual like god. So it's a really interesting kind of interplay there. Also notably very weird, but Aclazotz is the only one that is not just type god. He is a bat god, which is very unique that they decided to only give him that. Also the arts on these things are wild. So honorable mention there. Next up, honorable mention, we got Brass's Tunnel Grinder. We got a lot of honorable mentions, but some of these cards are freaking nutty. Look at this thing. This is a 3-mana legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you discard any number of cards, then draw the many cards +1. Can never get enough of that ability. Pretty sweet. And then it has at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, you put a boar counter on it. Then if there are 3 or more boar counters on it, you remove those counters and transform it. So first off, just right off the bat, do note that when ETBs, you're going to be doing a discard, which means presumably you're going to be descending in that turn. So at the very least, this gives you a descend counter, or rather, sorry, a boar counter before descending almost instantaneously. 9 out of 10 percent chance there. But then on the flip side, we got a land that taps out red, and it says that whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by Decathlon, the Searing Rift, you discover X, where X is that spell's mana value, which is really interesting. It ties the whole like discovering thing back to the mana value of the casted spell, so it's almost like Cascade, but again, a little bit more of that fixed Cascade. And this thing is just so easy to get to, in my opinion. Throwing permanents in your graveyard is like no problem whatsoever, and at a low cost of 3 CMC, the fact that this thing can help you to wheel out some of the cards in your hand anyway, I don't know, man. This thing seems busted to me. I like it a lot.
Yep, no, I'm very excited to be running that. I'm very excited to do some probably degenerate things with it. I'm very excited to flip it as absolutely quickly as possible. Last honorable mention here. It's going to be a quick one, but we got Bartolome del Presidio. He's the cool vampire guy that I was calling Bart earlier. He's a 2/1 for a white and a black, and I'm putting him on this list specifically because his text box says sacrifice another creature or artifact, there's no mana cost there. There's very little restriction there. You're going to put a +1/+1 counter on him, and that's all fine and dandy. But we get an unrestricted sacrifice that works for artifacts and creatures, and I think that is bonkers. We don't get a whole lot of those. And sure, we're not getting mana out of this one, but that's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. This is a carrion feeder, but he also lets you hit artifacts and whatever. I like this guy a lot. Also the vibe for him. He's definitely my favorite of the conquistador style vampires. However, he's dead. Yep, he's dead. So don't get too attached. He's dead. Him and Inti are up there chilling, you know what I'm saying? But now it's time to get into those top 10. Now this is the real juice, the spice, the meat, as is decided and determined solely by the biased me and the biased John. So here they come. Strap in. First up here is a choice for myself. This comes into my top 10 for the set, which is Bygone Marvels. Now this is a pick actually out of the Commander deck products. It is 2 green pips for a sorcery with Descend 8 that says when you cast the spell, if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, you can copy this spell twice, and you may choose new targets for the copies. What does it do, you ask? It returns target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, then exile Bygone Marvels. This thing is incredible. This is like Reap the Past, or, old school, what's that old card that just be doing this thing? Reclaim or something? It's a classic, go grab a permanent, pop it back into the hand. However, this thing, for its cost and the check that it needs, Descend 8, whatever, bro. Like, the deck that's going to run this thing, that's going to be easy. In Commander, getting Descend 8, I feel like, is a no problem whatsoever. At 2 mana, this thing is like a less efficient replenish or whatever. You guys know the card, the green pip thing that goes and gets me one of these dudes. So it's a little less efficient at that. Fine, it's still usable at that cost. However, the fact that later in the game, mid to late game, you are definitely going to be able to have that Descend 8 trigger. This thing is a 2 mana draw 3. It's a 2 mana return 3 permanents from your grave to your hand. That card trade-off is incredible. And I don't know, I love recurring stuff. This card's crazy. I think it's going to be really strong when we see it out there.
Yeah, I think one of the strongest parts about it is I think it's going to pop up so many places in Commander. I think we're going to see it. It doesn't just need to go in a deck that's purposely filling your graveyard. I mean, in a generic mono green deck, somebody board wipes you, probably have probably have the 8 permanents in your graveyard right there. It's immediately you're going to be able to see it all over the place, which is I mean, you can't go wrong. Can't go wrong. One of my first picks here is going to be, we're going back to Squirming Emergence. Believe it or not, I know we talked about the flavor, but I'm going to gush a little bit more. So for 1, a black and a green, and this has Fathomless Descent, you get to return to the battlefield, target non-land permanent card in your graveyard with a mana value less than or equal to the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So, that's so good. That fits in such a good slot. For 3 mana, you get a conditional reanimate that's only conditional on whether there's stuff in your graveyard. I think that, sure, we're not getting some busted 1 mana reanimate, but 3 mana is really nice because we get, we have a few 1 mana, a bunch of the 2 mana enchantment ones, and then most of the reanimation spells we get, they're sitting at that 4 or higher. It's 4 mana and they get a +1/+1 counter, or it's 6 mana and you get one of them and it gets some other nonsense, or it's 5 mana and you get a dude and a half. I don't know. I don't care. One of my favorite reanimation spells in all of Magic has always been Victimize. You sack a guy, you get 2 dudes. This is another really, really, really utilitous reanimation spell. It's in Golgari colors. Oh no. I don't think that's an issue for it at all, and it's at a really good mana value that needed, I think, more of that at that price point, so to speak. I'm just excited to use it. I'm just very, very, very excited to put this card to use.
Yeah, this thing is cool at 3 CMC. Obviously, in the right deck, it's just pretty much like an unrestricted reanimation. But at 3 CMC, that's spicy. I like it as well. Next up here, we got Ripples of Potential. This is another commander choice. For 1 and a blue, you have an instant that says Proliferate. Then choose any number of permanents you control that had a counter put on them this way, and those permanents phase out. So this thing's pretty cool. Obviously, we have lots of counter stuff going around nowadays. So a 2-mana instant to Proliferate is already pretty decent. Obviously, like maybe a little spicy, a little pricey for just the proliferation, but giving you the versatility to be able to phase. We talked about it if you saw our short way back in the day on phasing, but phasing is basically the new immortality in Commander at least. And I think somebody over there at Wizards knows it because we've been getting a few more cards nowadays that have to do with phasing and bring it back into the game. But obviously phasing is one of those situations. It's really the only situation you can protect your creature from the non-targeted kind of interactions. So like obviously like you get your boy to have hexproof and indestructible, somebody comes out with a farewell, they're gone, right? Well, not if they phase out. So phasing has these incredibly kind of more powerful nowadays implications than maybe it even used to. So any card that comes out that lets you instant speed with a high probability to phase out anything that you're going to want to protect, this is the thing. This is the way, man. Obviously, it needs to go in the right deck. It needs to go in a deck that cares about counters. But in a deck that cares about counters, if you got blue, I don't know. I don't really see a world where you don't play this card. And that's why it's on my top picks.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like for me, it's the choice. It's you proliferate, which is already a choice. If you want more counters, great. If you don't want more counters, also great. And then you can choose creatures that had a counter put on them that way, but you don't have to choose them all. So maybe I got 10 dudes, 8 of them have counters, I proliferated 5 of them, and I'm phasing out 2 of those guys. There's just like, it's so many multi-step choice there. I do, that in itself is just really interesting to me, how many choices you get with that card. Yeah. Next card I'm pulling up here, we're going to go with the Contested Game Ball. This card has struck a particular chord with me. I love the Strixhaven Stadium, you heard it here, guys. Strixhaven Stadium, and you're passing back the points, and you gain points, and you lose points. This, to me, is almost like a mini version of that. It's a little game ball, so it's a 2-mana artifact that says whenever you're dealt combat damage, the attacking player gains control of Contested Game Ball and then taps it. And then for 2 mana and tap it, you get to draw a card and put a point counter on the Contested Game Ball. Then, if it has 5 or more point counters on it, you sacrifice it and make a treasure. So it's got this like different people can take the ball, you can invest more into it, you can draw cards and add points to it, or you can just like untap it and hold on to it so someone else doesn't have it. Like it almost adds like a cool little mini game, but instead of having the super high stakes of Strixhaven Stadium, we're going for like drawing a couple of cards and making a treasure, and that's it. And I just thought that was really fun. It also, again, we kind of alluded to El Dorado before when we were talking about the story, but they have that point in the movie where they're playing with the game ball and it's actually an armadillo, and that is the game they're playing. So it's another really cool, like, obviously the game they were playing in that movie was a direct cultural reference, and they captured that same thing here, like, in a really, really cool, fun way, which I really like.
Yeah, I think this thing is a lot of fun. It's like you kind of said, it's like lower stakes contested jewel or whatever. A coveted jewel.
Yeah, coveted jewel.
Coveted jewel is like super risky, super high stakes. If somebody's stealing it, they're drawing 3. They have a 3-mana rock. This thing is like a lot lower stakes. Like you can draw 1 if you invest a little mana into it. You might be the guy who ends up getting the treasure. But like sometimes that's fun, to have something that like is like just value that you can steal as opposed to being like, oh, this thing is going to close the game out. So I like it as well. Next up here for me is going to be the Dinosaur Egg. I believe this is a Commander product one, but it is so flippin' cool, very powerful. It is 1 and a green for a 0/3 Dinosaur Egg that has Evolve. So if you don't remember what Evolve does, basically if a creature enters battlefield under my control, if that creature has a greater power or toughness than this creature, the dinosaur egg is then going to get a +1/+1 counter. Its next ability is whenever dinosaur egg dies, I can discover X, where X is its toughness, and it starts as a 0/3. So for 2 mana, this thing, at worst, let's say it died immediately. For 2 mana, you then get to discover 3. You might not win on that deal, but there's pretty high possibility that you're going to walk away from it relatively okay. 66% chance you get back your mana or more on whatever next thing you hit. And those are pretty decent odds. Obviously, I'm particularly partial to this card because of my Atla Palani deck, which I don't know if you guys have seen our original Comfy Meets competitive game, but that was where we featured Atla. And I don't know, she packs a punch, and in Atla, this thing is crazy. It is going to trigger Atla to allow me to do my egg-based flip while also putting a trigger to discover on the stack. And that, my friends, is a 2-for-1 hot deal bargain time that big old Dan loves. This thing is nutty. I can't wait to go crazy with it.
I am equally excited to be equally disgusted by the kind of things I see flip out with that card in Atla. Next thing I'm bringing up is, believe it or not, another colorless card. Very strange for me to give all these artifact loves, but we got the Progenitor's Icon. For 3 mana, you get an artifact that says, as Progenitor's Icon enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. So now you guys all get to go, oh, we get it. It's not artifact stuff. It's typal. That's why John likes it. You're darn right. So, you choose your creature type, then you get to tap it to add 1 mana of any color. So we already got, okay, there's no restriction on that. Great, it's a 3 mana rock that taps for whatever we want. But the spiciness here is you can tap it. The next spell of the chosen type you cast this turn can be cast as though it had flash. So you're telling me I can leave this card up for responsiveness in a typal deck, or I can leave it up just for mana, because mana's good, we all need mana, or I can flash in cards in color combinations and types that don't normally, excuse me, that don't normally have access to that. Flash is cool. I only have 1 creature with flash in my mono green bear typal deck, and it just has flash because it does. Having the option to have an artifact that I can use for mana if I need it, or it gives me the option to play more responsively in typal strategies that often do not get that privilege, is very exciting. I have a bunch of decks that I want to put this in because I think they're just going to be able to take advantage of that very well, not only because of the ability to flash in some creatures that normally don't have it, but leaving the mana up for choice. Do I want to play another creature, or do I want to draw cards, or do I want to counter a spell? I don't know. You know, I've only played 1 counter in the last 40 years, but it might happen, and it might be with this card. You wait and see.
Flash enablers, dog. You know your boy over here be loving that flash. I want to play everything at flash speed forever, 5 ever, and this thing will let me do it at 3 ever. 3 CMC, that is. Okay. Moving on. All right, next up we got the Contest of Claws, which is another commander card. Who would have thunk? It's a 1 in the green for a sorcery that says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. So we got a classic bite effect, which is that one-sided fight. But then, if excess damage was dealt this way, discover X, where X is that excess damage. That is just really fun. I love that. Like a way to spice up, kind of like a done over and over again ability at this point. Fighting and biting has been something we've seen time and time again. Mm-hmm. Here's a way to make it ever so slightly more powerful and reward you for having really that prize fighter. I am just about done brewing a Legolas Master Archer deck, which you guys aren't familiar, is an absolutely cracked card when it comes to effects like this based on his triggers. Go check him out after you've done the video if you guys want to see what I mean. But in a situation like that, this gives me another path to generate massive value off of these guaranteed fights, because it doesn't feel so good when you take a bite card or a fight card and use it on you're 10-10 because you need to eat their value 2-2 or something, right? Because sometimes the 2/2 or 1/1 on your opponent's side of the battlefield could have this effect that is manipulating the game state like crazy. But fighting it with something gargantuan, I don't know. Sometimes we walk away feeling like it's a bit of a waste. We had 10 damage we could have dealt. What was the point of choosing to, expunge that damage onto a 1/1? In this instance, Contest of Claws allows us to get around that by getting some ancillary benefit from the fact that we would sometimes need to make that choice. Love this card. Really cool.
No, I hadn't even thought about it the way you explained it, but no, I'm very excited for that implications of like feeling better about a choice that you may not have wanted to make because of that power differential. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Next card here for me is going to be the Corpses of the Lost. It is a 2 generic and a black enchantment that reads, skeletons you control have +1/+0 and have haste. So, Corpses of the Lost, the souls are lost, the corpses of skeletons, we're getting a heavy theme here. And then when Corpses of the Lost enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 black skeleton pirate creature token. So already we're getting immediate value there, that we're going to get a 2/2 that gets haste and +1/+0. Very exciting. And at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, you may pay 1 life. If you do, return Corpses of the Lost to its owner's hand. So, you're buffing your skeletons, you're giving them haste, you can send them to combat, you're making the creature to begin with, and then if the creature doesn't die, great, you have a skeleton that's a 3/2 haste, and if it does die, or if you descended some other way, you're bouncing Corpses of the Lost and you're playing it again next turn to make more skeletons to continue to buff the ones you already have. I think this is a really interesting card. I think it's a really fun card. And I think the ability to like play it over and over and over, like it almost to me has the feeling of a creature, but it's not. It's an enchantment that you're going to repeatedly cast by bouncing it back to your hand in black. I think that was a really interesting choice. And I think the ability to like propagate a lot of skeletons, or at least continuously regenerating a skeleton if the one dies, is just a very valuable and a very interesting tool that this card gives you.
Yeah, I like this card a lot. I mentioned it to you when we first saw it, but I think this thing's kind of cracked. Like, I just like that it comes down as a 3-mana 3/2 with haste, if you want to look at it that way. But then if that 3/2 does get blocked and dies or something of that nature, it triggers its last ability here, which allows you to return it to your hand and possibly just do that same path next time. So like the loops that this thing can do, I just think is really strong. I don't know. I love it. Next up for me, we got a cave. So we talked about caves at the beginning. This is the spiciest cave by far, in my opinion. This is basically our cave version of a Vesuva clone, if you guys are familiar with Vesuva from the olden days, but it functions slightly differently. This is Echoing Deeps. It's a land cave. You can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any land in a graveyard, except it's a cave in addition to its other types. You can also tap to add a waste mana. So the reason I think this one is especially cool, in a way, it's like much better than Vesuva because it's kind of modal. You can play it in just the I need a land right now, it's early game, whatever, it taps for a waste, done. But you can also play in the extremely spicy copy of land out of the grave manner, which then would have it come into play tapped. But again, like if you need that mana right away, it has the mode. But copying anything in graveyard, obviously lands are busted. We've all learned this, and somebody's got to have something good in their graveyard for you to copy, if not yourself directly. And in the right deck, we can pretty much guarantee that. This thing is really awesome. Also, the art is awesome. All these like crazy pillars in this underground world with just one T-Rex being like, "What's happening?" Just brings me a great amount of joy.
Nah, I mean, anything with graveyard play, I'm down, and the fact that it's any graveyard, so maybe you threw it into your colorless deck, because you're like, well, somebody else might have something decent, like the flexibility there, I love. Last card for me, we're coming in with, yes, another artifact. Absolutely astounding. So, Sunbird Standard is another 3-mana artifact. It also taps to add 1 mana of any color. Some might say, I like 3-mana mana rocks. And then it has Craft with 1 or more for 5 mana. So, You can craft it with one thing. You could craft it with a bunch of things. What do you get when you craft it with a bunch of things? It becomes a Sunbird Effigy. I've never seen an effigy not be horrifying, so this is a nice change of pace. It is an artifact creature bird construct star. It has flying, vigilance, and haste. And then, Sunbird Effigy's power and toughness are each equal to the number of colors among the exiled cards used to craft it. And if that isn't enough, you can tap it, and for each color among the exiled cards using to craft it, Sunbird Effigy adds 1 mana of that color. So, what do you get for crafting it with a 1 card with its 5 colors? Or 5 cards that are each 1 color? You get a 5/5 flying vigilance haste mana rot to tap for 5. It's a timeless lotus that's going to punch you in the mouth. It's very exciting. I think that in the right deck, this card in general can be very flexible, but in the right deck, in a deck where you're like, I got 2-3 color permanents I don't need, or I don't know, maybe somebody blew up your favorite 5 color permanent and you're like, well, now that it's in my graveyard, I'm going to craft with it. I just think this card is super cool. It's interesting, albeit not quite as insane as the Pirate Throne, Grim Captain, Evil Darkness, Shadow Lord guy. But it's a really interesting way to craft. I like that it's an open craft. It's not 1 artifact. It's not 2 creatures. It's 1 or more of anything. So there's a lot of options here for what you can craft it with. And I think that it's good before you craft it, and it's very good afterwards if you craft it with the right things. I'm very excited to scratch my brain about which of my decks I can argue a spot for, because I'm very excited to put it somewhere.
Yeah, it's actually funny you bring up the effigy thing, because I didn't even really register that when I first read this card, but it's true. I thought effigies literally were like, you take the thing you kill, mutilate it, and then put parts of it on a statue to imply to others this is what's going to happen to you type of deal. I thought they were a threat, you know what I mean? But I don't know, maybe that's some random skinned sunbird that they've turned into a kite, and that's what makes it an effigy, which makes it a much darker tone. But I'm just saying, I literally never even realized that about the name. This thing is pretty cool, and I do like the idea of turning my old 5-color trash that's sitting in the graveyard into a fresh new 5/5 flying vigilance haste timeless lotus. That sounds pretty tight. But that wraps up the top 10 from us, guys, which obviously these are crazy biased picks. But these are the things we either think are absolutely crazy powerful stompy, or we're just excited to play. But we want to know from y'all. At least give us your top 1 or top 2 or something. We're just really interested to see what you guys are excited about. But with that being said, we're going to wrap things up. Whew. We made it. You made it. You're still here. That's amazing. Not many people make it to the wrap-up. You're a real one. But now that we talked all these specifics, we talked the story, we talked our favorite cards, we said art things, we said flavor things, but now we're going to go 1 level up. We're going to say, what do we think about this set? What's our general takeaway? Are we pumped? Are we jazzed? What's going on? John, tell me what's going on.
So, after all the talking and thinking, I gotta say, no, yeah, of course I'm pumped. I mean, it's new Magic cards. I love new Magic cards. We all love new Magic cards. That cardboard straight out the pack, but not just any Magic cards. I really like the set. I think that they introduce a lot of cool new stuff. I think there's a lot of cards that are going to be widely usable in the format we love and play, Commander. From what I've heard, there's a lot of things that have people really excited about the limited environment and the pre-constructed environment that isn't Commander. I think that there's a lot of cards that are going to already, even just through talking about them, that are surprising me on how excited I am about what I could do with them. And there's a lot of flexibility in so many of the cards. I mean, sure, is 4 mana, 4/2 Dino with haste flexible? No, but in general, I think the set has a lot of flexible cards, and I was originally very concerned that we were going to get another. I felt previous Ixalan was very. There are 4 typal things in this set, and you're going to build one of them. And I do not feel that way at all about this set. I think there's so much more to it, and that rolling in all of these cultural things and all these artistic things, and the fact there's the gods and there's these vampires and there's the dinosaurs, but they're all doing very different things and different things they might have done in the past. I think that overall, I'm very excited, and I cannot wait, and I mean cannot wait to get my hands on these cards. What about you?
Yeah, I think that pretty much it's most of my points here. I don't know, man. I kind of love this set. I know like the story wasn't necessarily a home run for me, and that's fine. But like otherwise, as a set like of physical cards and game pieces, I'm just like I don't know. I'm kind of floored with a lot of the work that was done here. I definitely wanted to shout out real quick. And again, I might get the name pronunciations wrong, but Ovidio Cartagena and Miguel Lopez, which are the art director and world building director, respectively. I've seen these guys on a lot of, the various things that Magic Official has put out, the little questionnaires, if you will, regarding the set and the work that they did with respect to the design space. But this is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite set of Magic in art and world building sense. I think that there's just so much like work, respect, energy, and research that was done here to design cards that felt like they really embodied this culture of people, of regions, the South American, Mesoamerican, Latine like vibe throughout the entire treatment, and it's done with this just incredible attention to detail that I don't know, I don't feel like I've ever seen this before, from a Wizards product. It's not that we didn't have products that would have maybe paid attention to a time of in peoples or a certain culture or area. We have like Transylvanian type things, and like a very like kind of Western base sets a lot of the times that it's not that they're not capturing the vibe, but like, I don't know, there's such a difference between, I feel like the inspiration, the vibe, and like the feeling of this set. This set feels like you're transported to that world, to these ideas, these principles, these celebratory works, these styles of art, even just in the versatility in the different types of treatments. You know what I mean? Like, not necessarily giving every single card every single kind of treatment, but just having the energy, the wherewithal, the like attention to make all these different types of call outs to stylized art with respect to this kind of cultural world. I just think is really cool. Now, obviously, also the cards be doing crazy strong stuff. There's some cards in this set that I'm very excited to use. I didn't put it in my top 10, but the Skull Spore Nexus or whatever, I didn't put it there because I mentioned it in the art. And, also, I don't know. It's like everybody knows it's going to be good, right? But like cards like that, like, oh man, I can't wait to slot some stuff into my decks. Like, we really push the power envelope on a lot of these things, which I like, but not too far, I think. So, I don't know. Long story short, this is a 10 out of 10 for me. Story-wise, I don't know, but like set-wise, cards, I think 10 out of 10. Now, one thing I would note with respect to what I mentioned, and this is kind of like love letter / request from me to Wizards, is I would really like to see in some kind of formalized like format the inspiration behind a lot of these cards, because I did listen to a talk with a video, Cartagena, about the inspiration for Dinosaur Egg, which actually came from like a childhood kind of cultural memory of this specific like way that they did the egg painting, kind of like how we would imagine here in like our modern Western society for like painting eggs in Easter style. But the story that was told there added so much context to the card for me, and the art that like the intention behind the art that I feel like a lot of times is a behind the scenes thing. And when we hear about it, sometimes like in that talk I was listening to, and again, it was a while ago, so the details are a wash to me. Go check it out if you can find it. It was an interesting story that was being told. I just don't want to misquote it, but that was so cool to me to have that vibe, right? To have the peek behind the window, but it was just kind of like a passing thing I felt was mentioned in the conversation because he was given this very specific question that kind of brought that up for him. So I don't know, Wizards, I would love it. I don't know if you guys would love it out there. So join the petition if you would. Throw something up in the comments if you would enjoy something like this. But I would love to see some kind of article or focal, capture of, some specific cards throughout sets, key cards, key arts, things that might have inspiration in the design team and the stories behind them, because I believe that creates so much context behind cards, and it creates love for cards that goes beyond just what they do and their typing and so on and so forth. Like I would, be as bold to say like a video's, love for the dinosaur egg card, it doesn't really have a lot to do with what the dinosaur egg is, but the art and inspiration behind it there is definitely something that, can resonate with more people the more that we share it. So, and that's one thing I just love about the set. I know that's a bit of a long-winded tangent, but I think that it's something I definitely wanted to put out there because it's really cool. However, with all that being said, and I mean all that being said, we're just two dudes. Welcome to Two Dudes Opinions. Two dudes really quick, maybe slightly inaccurate recapture of the story, and two dudes really quick and dirty favorites from the set. But we want to know the multi-dudes. What do you love about this set, or hate, or whatever? Don't get crazy on me, but you know what I'm saying. What card do you absolutely want to put into your decks like tomorrow as soon as this thing releases? It doesn't release officially tomorrow. Don't, take that literally, but you know what I'm saying. However, go ahead and down in the comments and let us know. Also jump over onto our Discord and let us know over there, because that's really where we're getting the conversation started in our little community, and we hope to build that more and more over time. But thanks for being comfy with us and joining us in this trek down the descent into the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and we will talk to you in the multiverse.